G'day and welcome to Ancestry Unpacked news for the 19th of June. My name's Michelle Patient. Let's get stuck into it, shall we? So first of all, I just wanted to go over some of the recent updates in case you've missed some of the details. And the most interesting new feature of the website itself is a new tool. And well, it's an old tool that's come back with some extensions to it. So if you haven't seen MyTreeags before, it's on your profile page of people on your tree, and you'll see there you can click on it, and that right-hand side will open up, showing you not only notes and comments, but the different tags available for you to mark against this individual in your tree. Just to make it look a bit larger, you can have customized tags, tags that define their characteristics, how good your documentation is or isn't, the DNA references to this person, their life experience, their relationships, and other status around your level of research and where you're at. So taking a closer look at the drop-down arrow beside each of these, here's the list of defining characteristics, which is really long. So I'm just going to show you some closer up because I don't want you to forget about help in that question mark. So click on those question marks if you don't understand what the tag is referencing, and you'll see most of these are very American focused. So there's tools for managing this, so don't worry about that. Many of us don't have Civil War Confederate soldiers. I think it's fascinating the number of tags that have been developed that are useful to us outside of the US. The one that I liked to look at was this one, economic mobility. The evidence suggests the person increased their financial well-being. Yeah, I have an apprentice that came out at 15 from London into the colonies, had no money, went bankrupt twice because I have the documents, and died in the 1880s as the 17th richest man in the colony. So he definitely will get that box ticked. You might have some of these too. But have you got some missing records that you need to focus on, and you come across them because they're like bright, shiny objects as you're doing other things, and you think, I must remember that. That's why MyTreeags are really useful, that you can note then and there and know that you'll come back to do more research. The other sorts of the DNA tags, I put them on every single match. I haven't needed to use the other two because it just makes sense to me from the DNA match to look at their tree in horizontal pedigree view of ancestors, but other people like to use them on other levels of their tree. So feel free. You can mix and match. There's no rules. Just make sure they make sense to you. Life experience is particularly interesting. I do have an enslaved person. I have plenty of immigrants. Indentured servants, as often those red leg Irish were. Did they serve as military service or did they enslave others? So those sorts of life experience tags may well fit your family history. But there are other ones like adopted in or out of a family, or they died quite young. This is one of my direct ancestors, and I know some people often like to mark those, and the people with many spouses or never married, etc., etc. Other ones are like, how do you keep track if you're doing a lot of work and you might have floating branches? How do you keep track of everything? MyTreeags will help that because when you go to filter your found set, you can use those tags to find them again, particularly if they're floating and you keep thinking, how am I going to find these people again? I had to invent my own custom when these started. There wasn't a to-do, so you'll see that when I show you some of my custom tags, because they have a to-do now, which there wasn't when they started. You want to note when you have no documentation because you might want to come back to those, and do note when they're partially documented. They're helping others that you're not necessarily fully sure of everything yet, particularly that useful hypothesis or complete button. In other words, I don't plan on doing any more on this, is verified and unverified. So there's quite a few useful tools there. But for me, I had some specific issues when I started out, and you'll see right at the bottom there's my to-do. But also being the child of an adopted person, I wanted to mark my adopted parents as well, rather than just my mother being adopted in or out of a family, the family itself as parents that made this choice, because I've quite a few of those in branches of my family. I also started thinking I've got a lot of blacksmiths. I certainly have a lot of convicts, but I also manage more than one set of DNA. And so, how am I going to track a match that isn't mine? So, I made tags in particular for a couple of family members I was working on, all the matches that relate to an abandoned fosterling in our family, to identify Molly's parents, which we managed to do. But I had many people's DNA to help me do that. So, everyone in a tree that linked back to Molly's children, I marked them all as Molly's DNA, and similarly on my dad's side of the family when I wanted to do some work focusing on that. But you might be the descendant of other key people that are not necessarily obvious to people in this list, but for us in Australia and New Zealand, being in our first fleet or those first migrant ships is actually a big deal, and sometimes they're very interrelated of that fan network, and so marking them all that came together on a ship can be well worth it. And military service, from the way we use it, isn't going to cover the Royal Navy service that's in many lines in my family. So again, my husband's family has some nuns in it, and that wasn't documented is one of the characteristics to add. So this might help you think of some things that are useful to you. And do remember, you can add the information for that little to help you remember why you created this as well. So in the terms of First Fleet, because I have first European settlers in more than one colony, I've very generically used them as early migrants that were in the first waves of European colonisers into countries which had existing populations of non-Europeans. So in other words, those early colonial stages. So hopefully that helps. And if you ever want to just go find in your tree, you'll be able to use as a filter those DNA tags. So I can see that on more than one line of my family, I have multiple blacksmiths. And when I find data about blacksmiths, I now have an easy link of people to link that data to, rather than having to remember all the names of all the people who were smiths. So I hope that kind of is a couple of good, useful examples for you to work on between now and next time Fiona and I meet in July. But the other news is, of course, the latest data sets available to us all as Ancestry users. So there's not a large amount of data this month. There's a lot of other updated info, but so there's people from Arkansas and Vermont, some prison records, Malta again, in Italian, Pennsylvania railroad workers. That's a really large data set for people who needed support, the relief cards. And then we've got some Georgia people who ran off during the military. They weren't there to vote. So you might like to find those there useful for your particular research interests. For those of us with UK interests, there's the Carmarthenshire Wales crew lists, and people travelling away, often so useful to find where they came from. So even if you're not really sure whether they came from this part of Wales, definitely go check out those crew lists. If you have any mariners to check out for that time frame. Military honours, of course, from both Scotland and England, and then the poor law records, a shorter period in Scotland from 1817 to 1852, but the poor law records reminded me of my own poor law records that I've found so far in London. And so to my delight, when I collated this list for you, of all the updated data sets. So in other words, more information is available to us because either more records have been indexed and digitised, there can be multiple reasons behind the scenes. So you might want to come back and freeze and have a good read of this. There's quite a few around the traps to look at, and I'm just going to take you through the top one because I really couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that there's been an update to the data set that I know I'm interested in. So excuse my indulgence, folks, but I'll just give you a brief moment of brick wall. So when I got to my father's grandfather, Alfred, all his documentation just said that he had a father called Charles Day, no middle name, that he was born around 1868 to 1870, depending on what record you looked at, and he was from Bethnal Green. The problem was there were 3 Charles Days, all in Bethnal Green, all having Alfreds, all around the same time. And I traced forward through the census documents, and I couldn't eliminate any one family and say, well, they can't be mine. And thankfully, when I did DNA back in 2015, I did get a match of someone who'd gone to America, and their mother's grandmother was an Emma Day. And when we did the research together, guess what? There was only one Charles Day with a child called Emma. And then, of course, more people were testing their DNA, and I could confirm it because I also now connect to Franklin descendants. But the thing that was great for myself and John in New York was that, went too far. This was a newly indexed record back then, a few years ago. And so we both went not just one generation back, we were able to confirm further back about Charles. So in here, this is a poor law where they examined a guy called Charles Day, who'd been born around 1829. And in it, he lists his wife, the date they married, and the names of all their children. The eldest being Charles, who was the father of my Alfred. And then here we go, Emma. Oh, that's great. So now we have 2 of them. Anyway, we list through all of this. Oh, this is before Alfred was born. Sorry, so Charles and Henry and Mary Ann and Emma and Thomas. And they'd married quite a bit after the birth of their eldest couple of children, but we aren't going to let the truth get in the way of a good story. But he did write that his son was called, he's the son of Charles, a lawyer, and that his father had died some time ago. His mother was living as a servant. So we got back another generation as well as fleshing out some width as well, and ultimately getting Jane's maiden name from the marriage dates in this document meant we could fill out the tree. And so both John in New York and I were very happy because we suddenly went back 2 generations by finding the parents as well as going wider. And you'll see my Alfred and Elizabeth right there. But actually trying to find more information about this family, apart from knowledge and a few people who've done DNA, it really was a bit too much of a challenge with such a common name and almost nobody having middle names. So I decided this morning, as I was building this talk for you all, to just check out this recently updated dataset. It literally updated yesterday, and I just put in Charles and Day. I didn't use a lot of other information to find all of the people who were called Charles Day that ever went before the poor law. And you'll see there were 85 in total. And I can see the record about halfway that says Charles Matthew Day that we'd found before. But I was diligent and I started looking at some of the others. And some of these were not there when we found this a few years ago. So further down the page, here's Charles, married to Jane, and this is in 1896. So here we are many years later, from 1862, they're still in trouble and asking for relief. And there's a lot of information there about the family alive, and there are 3 daughters, and it has their married names. Yay! I knew Emma's married name because of the research already done from the DNA match. But Mary and Jane, I was not able to confirm because I wasn't buying lots and lots and lots of certificates. But now I have evidence to help me. It even tells me the addresses they're at and who they're married to's occupations, dock labourer and a blacksmith. So whether they're able to assist, you'll see that it tells me how many children they have. And then there's the late something wife, Alice Day. I need to investigate that because I have Anne as the mother. Who's this Alice? It is something more to check that is also in the poor law relief. And I didn't have time to do all the research today because I'm doing this now. But I went further forward and I looked down the rest of that list. And even though the name didn't make sense to me, that there was Charles Soter, Soter, if you look closely, it's Sadler, and they've written it in later. It feels like an occupation to me, not actually his name, but the same wife, Jane, same children as in the previous document, same addresses. But now this poor man, they were applying for a leaf right through until the turn of the 20th century. And so now I've got some narrowing down for their death dates. Just heart-wrenching to think how many decades this family was in need of relief from the local parish community. But if I look at the far right side, it actually tells me how lot and other terrible things, like his wife had been remanded to the house of the insane. So she clearly had started to get quite unwell in her old age. And I don't know that I particularly want to be the second daughter who was not able to offer any assistance with the first one was assisting with food. And the father had actually moved in with the daughter Mary. And in fact, it tells me he'd been there only for a few weeks. But always remember, like I say, to scroll down, because there were more gems further down where every address that they'd lived at and had relief at, and why he was there, because he was just too old. He hadn't worked for 2 years. The gems of information about this family in the 1890s that I had no idea of previously, because more records have been indexed in more depth, are just sad but very wonderful treasures. 40 years in Otis Street and 30 years of something else. So I need to spend more time digging into this document. And just for an example, I did check all of the other Charles Days briefly. This one isn't mine, but he's around the same age, and he has a brother, George, who works for a farmer, and there's so much family history value buried inside these poor law records. I hope that encourages you to go and check those recently updated records. And why don't you make a date with yourself? Write it in your calendar. Maybe every 2 or 3 months, you'll go and just check all the recently updated records. Some of us would really do it once a month to make that date, so it's quite less work to do, especially on all your brick walls, or those people you feel you don't have enough documentation on. The link to that update list is in the description for this video. So thank you very much for watching. My name's Michelle. We're here every Friday. We'll be back next Friday with a DNA tip, in fact, before Fiona and I will be back for the first Friday of the month with a webinar talking about whatever we found interesting in the last month. So thanks for the support of Ancestry, and thank you for watching. See you all here in due course, and I hope this is helpful. Bye.